Good chat, I was popping YouTube. So, I just finished reading Fight Club.
Welcome to Fight Club. The first rule of Fight Club is, you do not talk about Fight Club. The second rule of Fight Club is,
act overtly gay all the time. I want to fuck dudes.
And I'm sure pretty much everyone is familiar with the film by David Fincher, but it's based on the novel by Chuck Palahniuk. Palahniuk? That's how I'm going to pronounce it. And I'd never read it until, I don't know, like 3 days ago. And, well, I did. And this book has quite a lot to unpack, so we'll be getting into it. And I'm sure most of you have probably at least seen the film Fight Club, but for all, like, I don't know, 10 people who haven't seen it, here's the plot summary.
My head loose, but no worse than what's going on in your parents' bedrooms. Sometimes I want to get on TV and just let loose.
So the story opens on the narrator. This guy doesn't have a name, so he's just the narrator. And anyway, the story opens on kind of a flash forward, actually, where the narrator's on a building that is rigged to explode, and some dude called Tyler Durden has a gun in his mouth. So then we go back to the beginning of this weird and wonderful tale. Narrator man is this really nihilistic and depressed dude. He thinks life is meaningless, he has, brutal insomnia, and he's bored with his sort of upper middle class life of modern opulence and plenty. So he goes off to all of these like support groups for people with things like, I don't know, testicular cancer, or these brain parasites and all kind of things like that. And basically he gets off on it. But one day he sees this girl, or young woman, called Marla Singer, who is definitely not Helena Bonham Carter.
Do you have any idea who my leading lady is on this film?
In the Tim Burton film?
Yeah.
Helena Bonham Carter?
How'd you know?
Stab in the dark.
And anyway, she keeps showing up at these events, and he thinks she's a faker, and she thinks he's a faker, because they both are. And because when she rolls up to his testicular cancer one, he's pretty much sure, because, women don't have testicles, and by extension can't get testicle cancer. And anyway, so he talks with her, and they basically decide they're going to split up which support group the other can go to, because they're just ruining it for each other. And they have the same problems, and, he found a soulmate, kind of. So one day, narrator comes back to his apartment, and it's blown up, and all his stuff has also been destroyed. So then he meets this absolute Sigma male Giga Chad called Tyler Durden. So Tyler is a, true-thinking Sigma who works at night as a film projectionist, and he splices, like, porn into his films for, like, a frame at a time. And he also works as a waiter who basically, he works in this fancy hotel and he pisses into rich people's food. So he and the narrator man become friends, and one night at a bar, Tyler asks narrator man to punch him in the face. And so they have a bit of a dust-up, and then they start Fight Club.
Hey, that's the name of the show.
So Fight Club has a couple of rules. Like, the first rule of Fight Club, you don't talk about Fight Club. And the second rule of Fight Club, which is, also you don't talk about Fight Club. And then there's some other, like, actual rules about how to fight, but they're not that important to the story. So anyway, Fight Club starts up in the basement of a bar on Saturday nights, or, well, I guess technically Sunday mornings, and narrator shows up to work with black eyes and stuff, and nobody really cares about it that much. And then he starts to see more and more people, all of them men, and most of them young, with black eyes and split lips, etc., just in his everyday life. All sorts of men. Computer coders, fast food workers, garbage truck drivers, I don't know. Basically, they just keep popping up, and, you're not allowed to talk about Fight Club, although people clearly are, because new people are joining. And, but it's sort of like a sign of respect. They can't acknowledge each other in the real world, but they know. And so the narrator man moves in with Tyler, and they, Tyler's all really cult leaderish and spiritual, and he, brands the dude with his lips, and they make soap, which also helps with explosives, and then... Anyway, one day Marla calls up, trying to get hold of the narrator, because she accidentally is killing herself, and she gets Tyler instead, so Tyler goes and saves her, and they start fucking. And so Fight Club starts to get, a bit out of control. Tyler becomes a bit of an underground celebrity, and everywhere narrator goes, people seem to mistake him for Tyler. Fight Clubs start up everywhere, and Tyler starts something called Project Mayhem, which is, it's just, you ever heard of anarchism? It's just anarchism, basically. Alan Moore would be proud. So, dudes start showing up to Tyler's house to join Project Mayhem, and, They're all there making soap and explosives and things, and this whole big anarchist organisation starts up. But narrator wants out, and everywhere he goes, people still thinks he's Tyler. And it all comes to a boiling point when some bartender just straight up tells him that you were here like last week starting a fight club, you're Tyler Durden. So he calls up Marla and asks if they fucked, and she's all confused, and basically, shock horror, Tyler is the narrator. Although Tyler's not actually real, like that's not his real name, like he made up Tyler Durden. We never find out his real name, but it's a split personality, or something. It's Jacqueline Hyde, I guess. The book isn't that concrete about how exactly it works. But anyway, the narrator tries to shut down Project Mayhem, but Tyler built in some contingencies, so the boys try to castrate him for trying to stop Fight Club.
Get my dick sewn back on! You shut the fuck up!
However, he manages to escape, and then Tyler kills his boss, which is technically Tyler's boss, so he technically kills his own boss by pouring gasoline into his computer or something. And then he threatens to kill Marla if he interferes, but they're the same person, kind of, so it's all a bit of a mess. So the narrator goes to see Marla at one of their support groups, and they have a massive argument where she is all weirded out by the whole, multiple personality thing. Tyler then says that the one last thing he has to do is a cheeky little bit of martyrdom, and so cut back to the beginning, where Tyler is holding a gun in the narrator's mouth while standing on a building about to blow, which is, he's putting it in his own mouth, if you think about it. However, the police are coming, and then Marla and some of the people from the support group show up and try to talk him down, and the narrator shoots himself, but it just goes through his cheek and doesn't kill him, and then he gets arrested and sent to a mental institution, and he thinks he's in heaven, and, and Marla's in love with him, and is waiting for him to get out the mental asylum. The end.
And every single person is a slim shady lurking. He could be working at Burger King, spitting on your onion rings.
So there's quite a lot to unpack here. As far as themes go, this book is sort of a referendum on consumerism in primarily American culture, but it also talks greatly about, the crisis of masculinity. And so a lot of people say this story hasn't aged too well. They say that the whole, I'm so bored with my comfy life sort of rings a little hollow nowadays, as we've had, a major economic crisis, terrorism, a global pandemic, and the economic crisis that came along with that, and just major overhauls to our lives because of the threat of just war and terrorism and stuff, which weren't really that present in 1996 when this was written. However, I would argue that this book is probably more relevant now than it was when it was written in some ways. So while this book has some basic nihilistic philosophy that will entertain the 14-year-olds and some basic sort of anti-consumerism slogans, it's not that interesting. It's quite boring and overused, overplayed, as they say, and I don't think it was that interesting at the time. I think if you really want a proper, punchy satire for consumerism, American Psycho is by far the superior book and the superior film. I just think it does it much better, and it's kind of ironic because Fight Club is less married to its... It's less married to its setting of the 90s than American Psycho is married to its setting of the 80s, but American Psycho's, I think, satire and critique is actually more timeless than Fight Club's, which is kind of interesting that worked out that way. But for me, the real meat of the story here is its sort of referendum on masculinity, and that's, to me, what this book is really about. It's men trying to figure out how the hell we fit into the modern world. And this is a lesson or a theme or a discussion that I think actually has got more relevant even as the book's sort of direct satire becomes a little dated. So men fitting into the modern sort of post-industrial revolution world has been a shaky process. Men are pretty hierarchical, especially when compared to women, and this is just natural because of how men would have competed for mates back in the past. But anyway, in the capitalistic society, money is the basis of the hierarchy. There are few things that really can trump it, like I guess good looks maybe, but money talks. It's why Bezos can have like a Megan Fox clone hanging off of his bald, pudgy arm. But to a lot of men, young men especially, who don't have much money, it's very difficult to figure out how you fit into the structure. Even if you possess many desirable traits that just don't market themselves that well, it's kind of weird, and that's sort of what Fight Club focuses on, a lot of men who are sort of underachievers, I guess. And, I've met many guys, I probably would count as one of the many guys who would fit into this kind of niche, and, but I understand, moving on, that the narrator in Fight Club basically had it all. Like, he had, you know, fancy modern furniture, he had a really good job, he had a nice apartment, all things that just seem kind of hilariously unattainable right now, at least where I live. But a lot of the guys he attracts don't have any of that. You know, they need Fight Club because it lets them be men in a world that is trying to stop them from being men. It lets them establish dominance and how nature intended. You know, in Fight Club you don't have money or a name or anything when you're there. It's just you fighting some other guy. And, you know, you're just free from society for that one moment, you know. And, you know, all the money in the world doesn't matter. Like, you forget who you are in the outside world. And that's a thing that really plagues men, especially underachievers and generally low-income workers. Like, what do you do? I'm not saying that women have it any easier, but Fight Club is a book about masculinity, and this masculinity crisis, I feel, has probably hit its fever pitch about 4 or 5 years ago. So growing up, sort of my teenage years, formative years, I guess, being in the 2010s, I was bombarded with messages from the media telling me that being a man is a bad thing, you know, masculinity is a bad thing, men are either evil or stupid or both, that I was personally responsible for the world's problems, and just a lot of guys my age will know what I'm talking about, like, would have grown up with this. And so I was told it in school, in college, in all the films and TV shows that were around. You start to wonder, A, what message we were sending to men. Well, I say they were sending to men, young men. And you also start to wonder as a man, like, well, what do I do? Right? Luckily, I never quite fell into, like, the Andrew Tate trap, I guess. I've, you know, like, me and a lot of guys I know have mostly managed to figure it out or are in the process of figuring it out. But, you know, you really saw a lot of movements form around this problem, and a lot of them are, you know, young men that sort of mirror those of Fight Club. I mean, the incels are the best example I can think of, probably. You know, this book is definitely sort of talking to them or about them, I guess. But even, I think the rise of people like Andrew Tate is a great example of sort of how Fight Club would work itself out. So, sorry, got a bit of a cold. So you told a generation of boys that being a man was awful. So of course they found the one guy who would tell them that it's great to drive a fast car around and, you know, hang around with supermodels and all that kind of thing, and sort of sell them back that sort of power fantasy, right? But he also brought that call to action that someone like Tyler Durden does bring, of the world's against you, you know, the system's against you, everything's against you. It's that call to action that mobilizes young people. Because, I mean, like, Andrew Tate is basically the closest to an IRL Tyler Durden we're going to get. And this book also speaks to sort of the masculine urge for something like Fight Club. I mean, the whole premise being that you can just go to Fight Club and you all recognize each other in daily life, but you can't, you know, talk about it. But in Fight Club, it doesn't matter who you are in the outside world. In Fight Club, you are someone else. You know, you're a winner. You're a fighter. I mean, to be fair, like, video games are sort of the realistic example of this. I actually feel that, like, if this book had been written, like, I don't know, 5 years later or 10 years later, it kind of doesn't really make sense, because, like, you see that a lot with, like, I know, old school WoW players, for example. You see these guys who are working in fucking McDonald's or something, but then they're, like, the top, like, druid in their guild, or etc., right? Like, that once they're in that video game, who they are in the real world doesn't matter, right? Like, that kind of thing. And, but even stuff for me, I never played WoW, but, like, for stuff that I did, like the tabletop wargaming scene, is another great example. They're all male-dominated spaces because it sort of appeals to that same primeval, aggressive part of the brain that something like Fight Club would. And I mean, I've been rambling for a while, so, but that's the general theme or sort of referendum, and I think it's got a little bit more relevant actually as it gets older, which is kind of interesting. It's also interesting to me, because I wasn't alive when Fight Club was written, it's very interesting to me to see that a lot of common issues were being pointed out back then that are still present now that we really just haven't fixed, which makes me wonder if they were just always there. and they're just completely natural and they'll never go away. That's probably what it is. Right. But anyway, the book is great. It's very easy to read. It flows really well. Like, Chuck has this really great punchy style, and it's a proper roller coaster ride. I feel the book works a lot better than the film does because of its ambiguity, because the narrator is so unreliable. You never see a physical Brad Pitt walking around. You just hear about Tyler Durden. The twist works much better. I mean, I knew about the twist to Fight Club before I even watched the film, and I've watched the film before I read the book. So I mean, I've never got to experience it. But I feel it's not treated like as big of a deal here either. I feel like the film treats it a bit of a bigger deal. But I do feel the book starts off really great, but it kind of doesn't know how to end. It doesn't really know where to go. Like, Project Mayhem is just more boring than the Fight Club premise, and the whole thing wraps up really abruptly, and it really felt like that Palahniuk just didn't quite know where to take the story after he set it up, especially at the end, which makes sense. Fight Club was originally a short story. I think Chapter 6 of Fight Club, which is the one with the rules of Fight Club, that was the story, and then he just sort of like... This is sort of the afterword of the version I have anyway. He built the rest of the book around that. So structurally there's a few issues, I think. And the ending of the film is really different to the book. In the film, he shoots himself through the cheek. That kills Tyler for some reason. And then he gets together with Marla, and they succeed in blowing up the 2 skyscrapers. In the book, he just gets arrested and sent to a mental hospital. Which, ironically... So, I don't know if you remember this, but when... China, this was a few years ago now, they finally allowed Fight Club to be played, but the CCP censored it, as they do with everything. But they censored the ending, so like, it just cuts to black at the end, and there's like a black screen with text on it, and it just says something like, the anarchists were all arrested by the state and life returned to normal, or something. And it's kind of funny to me that the communist edit is actually closer to the original book than the American film was. And I remember this was a big deal at the time. Everyone's like, oh, they're changing Fight Club. And the author came out and been like, oh, I don't mind it, the ending's closer. And everyone was like, oh, he hates his own work. No, literally, like, the commie ending is actually the correct ending, which is kind of weird. But overall, a pretty sweet read. I really enjoyed it. It's also crazy that this was his debut. Like, I do not want to hear one more comment in my Shadow the Conqueror video trying to excuse that book for being Shad's debut. This was Chuck Palahniuk's first book. Like, whew. That argument just holds no weight. Like, I don't care if it's a writer's first book. Like, really. Is it good or not? I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 5. It's close to 5 out of 5, but... It's just too much of a mess at the end, in my opinion, and it just kind of doesn't know what it's doing. It feels like a collection of rough scenes at times, and less like an actual story. So that's why it's a 4 out of 5. And if you want to check out some of my writing, check out my short stories. They are on my website. And if you like these kind of angsty, sort of young man rages at society books, I actually did write one a few years ago. It was called Dead Skin Mask, and it's more of a horror and less of a satire. It sort of lacks Fight Club's wit and charm, and exchanges that for disturbing and edgy, I guess. There's some problems with it in hindsight. But let me know what you think, I guess. It's on Amazon, so check it out. And if not, just like, share, subscribe, and thank you. I will be seeing you all next time.
Buy my book. Buy my book before it's too late, people.
Y'all act like you never seen a white person before. Jaws all on the floor like Pam, like Tom.